This is a response to Fede's recent response to one of my videos. I'm not even sure that this thread has anything to do with antinatalism per se. There's a lot of mention in your previous video about that, but I'm not really referring to, in any of this, I'm not really referring to the subject of antinatalism in and of itself. I'm simply talking about Benatar's alleged asymmetry, which I don't think exists. I think that it is a gerrymander. I think that he's just sort of rigged the goalposts and he's somehow gotten everyone to agree to what he's done. I don't agree to what he's done. But some people have said that religion might not be a good idea to, or it might not be a good idea to bring falsehood into the issue of harm avoidance or suffering limitation, or whatever you want to call it. I don't necessarily disagree with that because, again, it might not work. But that's not the point. Here, the point is whether or not we can even consider it. And consider things like delusion and denial, and the relative value of truth. And you say that lying to someone can harm them. I'm not necessarily sure of that. For example, if I have information that I know will be damaging to someone else if they learn about it, but I withhold that information, and they never find out, and they go to their grave never having found out, then I would say that I have not in any way harmed that person, even though I withheld information. And there's any number of ways you can do that. The Christian idea of heaven and hell was a genius sort of way to get around what somebody, I think it was Matthew Shute, brought to my attention yesterday. Quite a good comment, actually. The Epicureans would say that, no, you don't want to put any faith in gods that don't exist because you're going to pray for them for certain things that they're not going to deliver on because they don't exist. So when your illusions are shattered, you're in trouble. Well, yeah, the Christians got around that one by saying, well, you're never going to find out in this life whether or not you can reap what you sow, as it were. You can reap the benefits of being a nice person. It comes after you're dead. So it's a surefire way to sort of get around that argument. You don't pray to God for anything earthly here. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to pray for your rewards after death, and you will get them, don't you worry. I don't really see how you can prove that that is wrong conclusively enough to disabuse a religious person of that kind of thinking. And I would say that it's, in terms of deliberately deluding somebody or deliberately deluding oneself, or not even deliberately deluding oneself, but using the mental exercise of faith. As it says, faith is belief in things for which there is no evidence. Or no overt evidence, but you believe anyway. It's an elaborate sort of doublethink that is employed to sort of get around the fact that you're choosing to believe in something that you don't have any evidence for. Now again, it's not, the argument I'm not making is that I'm not trying to argue whether or not religion is good. I'm not trying to argue whether or not atheism is a sensical position or anything like that. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm not trying to say that there is a God. I'm not trying to say anything like that. And what I'm saying is, if you accept Benatar's formula that suffering trumps everything, and harm avoidance takes precedence over just about everything, then you've put phenomenal reality in a secondary place to that. And if you can delude yourself to minimize or reduce or eliminate suffering, then I would say that the logic of his position demands that you do that. And I don't subscribe to the argument that that lies are always damaging. I don't. And I don't think that the evidence points in that general direction either. There are certain truths that people choose not to opt into, I guess. Again, Lovecraft's famous line from The Call of Cthulhu, where he says, one of the most wonderful things about human existence is that our minds are unable to corroborate everything that they contain. Because if we were able to actually see everything for what it was, it would we'd all go insane. We may, but that sort of implies that we're lying to ourselves anyways, even without talking about God or hope or anything like that. So arguably, just to exist, you have to lie, because we live in a world of forms, even though phenomenally speaking, none of these forms actually exist. We live with ideas, we live with concepts that none of them actually exist, but we've formed them into certain places in our mind, and they are illusions. They may be necessary illusions, but they're illusions nonetheless. As I always say, it's an illusion when I look around this room and see a table, a chair, a carpet beneath my feet, a roof above me, that kind of thing, because all that is a jumble of matter, energy, and empty space, all functions of each other. And ultimately, we don't know what matter is, we don't know what energy is, we don't know what space is, we don't know what any of that stuff is. These are just identities we've placed on things. So in that sense, we're living a lie anyway. So again, to avoid that moment of existential panic that Zapfi says we will certainly fall into if we actually see things for what they really are. Again, I would say that most people would go insane if they saw reality for what it is, but I don't think that everyone would. And in that sense, we're already living lies. We're already believing in all kinds of stuff that isn't phenomenally there. It just isn't there. It's stuff that we have invented. And, that's kind of the weird implication of everything that Zapfi says about anchoring, sublimation, that kind of thing. It doesn't necessarily militate towards antinatalism or his conclusions. I don't see how it does at all. All that it does is it says that there's a moment of existential panic that will drive us all insane if we look into it, and the only way to get around it is to lie to ourselves. So he's saying that we have to lie to ourselves anyways, regardless of what, whether or not, we believe in God or anything like that. So we may be lying to ourselves anyway. We may not be able to not lie to ourselves. But again, I'm not advocating that. I'm not saying that we should do this. What I'm saying is the logic of Benatar's own position demands that we do this, that we actually lie to ourselves if it will reduce suffering. Again, that's if he's going to place suffering in the position that he's going to place it in. I don't place it in that position, so I don't have to deal with that problem. You asked a number of other questions, or raised a number of other points concerning, reproduction and everything. I'll just give the answers. And again, I'm not directing the answers to these questions to you in particular, Fede. These are just sort of generically. When someone puts me on the spot and says, why do you, or what gives you the right to breed? Or have kids, or justify yourself, or whatever. Well, I just say, okay, in what capacity are you asking me that? Are you asking me that just out of curiosity? I'd be inclined to sort of say, well, that's a personal question. You always go around asking people very personal questions like that. If you're asking me in terms of justification, I'd say, well, okay, did you arrogate to yourself the right to ask that on behalf of what? On behalf of society? On behalf of even the unborn? On behalf of whom? If you're asking me to justify myself, who do I have to justify myself before? The obvious answer to that would be to the unborn, and then I would say, well, you don't even know that person, so you can't speak on their behalf. Nobody really can, actually. So I would say that nobody really is qualified to ask that question, if you really want to get right down to it. Who is anyone to ask anyone why they did anything? If we're going to sort of say, well, what if there's if we believe in things like moral absolutes and that kind of thing, I would say, okay, well, then you're going to have to sort of convince me that such moral absolutes exist, and you're going to have to convince me that you're qualified to question me on them, and that you're sort of you're not in a position where I can simply say, mind your own business. who is anyone to judge me, or who is anyone to judge anybody else? It's what I would simply ask. You're asking me to justify something. On what grounds are you asking me? What gives you the right? I suppose people might say on behalf of common decency, and then I would say, okay, then who put you in charge of common decency? And what makes you think that you have a monopoly on common decency? And you're going to have to tell me that common decency exists. You're going to have to tell me that that there's some sort of law written in stone that harm reduction is somehow moral. You're going to have to convince me of that. And you're going to have to convince me that you're entitled to actually be the person to question me on that. There's any number of things, like when you think that a question like that is straightforward, but it's not. What gives you the right to breed? It's not straightforward. It's an extremely presumptuous question. And I would say a question of almost mind-blowing arrogance when you get right down to it. Again, I'm not talking about you, Fede. I'm just saying to anyone who would ask anyone that question, who the hell are you to ask me that? Anybody can claim to be the guardian of morality and ethics and everything and start asking everyone to question, or asking everyone to account for what they do. So that doesn't mean I have to answer or even take any note of their question, that kind of thing. And again, we live our lives sort of assuming that there is such a thing, and that it is perfectly acceptable for us to ask these questions of other people. What gives you the right to do that? Well, what gives you the right to ask me that, is what I would respond with. And, again, I mentioned in, a number of other videos that I believe that Addendum, the guy with the hair and the eyes, lives in the shed somewhere, I said that he's abolished guilt because of the way that he's made guilt untenable in our society. He's made it impossible for us to use that as at least when you get, reductio ad absurdum, the way that he's taken it, you've removed its utility as a means of enforcing, or I shouldn't say enforcing, but implementing morality. It's just he's taken to the point where it's no longer tenable as a concept. When you start asking people questions like extremely personal things like that, like what gives you the right to breed or whatever, then what you're doing is you're questioning the very basic bedrock of everything in the assumptions behind human civilization. And when you do that, you're asking a question that is so fundamental and so rock bottom that you have to sort of, in order to respond to that, or in order to actually encapsulate the actual thinking behind even asking that question, you have to sort of say, okay, on what authority are you asking me? What is the role that you, whoever it is that's asking me to do this, are arrogating to yourself to say that what right do you have to do that? Because I'm not doing anything that humans haven't been doing since humans existed. So suddenly when I have to justify that, then what I'm saying is you push the limits of our thinking. Like normally we, as a civilization, think nothing of saying, what right do you have to do that? That's just how our minds work, since the Enlightenment, I guess, with utilitarian way that our ethics and our normal our thinking has evolved over time. And this seems to be a normal question to ask somebody. What gives you the right to do that? And, it's just so easy to counter that. But we don't want to do that because the damage that it could do to our thinking. Our zeitgeist, the whole way that our civilization functions. You just have to say, what gives you the right to ask me that? And what you're doing is, in that case, you're sort of asking everybody who has ever asked anyone to justify anything they have ever done, what gives you that right to ask me? Maybe if you're going to question my right to do what humans have always been doing, that's fine. I accept that. But you're going to have to accept the result of the Pandora's box that you open when you start asking that question. And that question is, people ask you one in return. What gives you the right to ask me that? And what that does is, it essentially throws all of our thinking right down the sink in terms of, I would argue, the glue that holds our society together. And if you want to start doing that, that's fine. I'm game. I can think outside of every conceivable box, or at least more than most people I know. I'll put it that way. But that's a dangerous question. And what gives you the right to do whatever? Because it assumes that we're just taking what we already think of as conventional morality and taking it as a given, and that we're not questioning it anymore. You question people on a fundamental thing like their decision to reproduce, and they either, say, that's none of your business or whatever, or they say, okay, I am being asked that, so I have to answer it seriously. Okay, wait a minute, what's the implication here? Okay, you're asking me this? What gives you the right to ask me that? Says who? And who says that you have the right to do that? Who says that anyone has the right to do that? Who says that anyone has the right to ask me to justify anything I have ever done? Do you want to answer that question? And again, I'm not putting that to you, Fede. Not at all. But what I'm saying is, if somebody's going to ask me for justification, and I'm going to ask them on what basis they're asking me, or what gives them the right to ask me what rights I have to do what I do. You see where that goes, eh? That kind of pushes things outside of any sort of goalposts we're normally used to dealing with in a functioning society. And if addendum has sort of, as I've said, abolished guilt, what asking that question, the question for justification of anyone for anything that they ever do, if you push that to its limits, what you're essentially doing is you're abolishing the concept of rights. That's what you're doing. Because you're sort of saying, what gives you the right? You're saying you don't have the right to do that. And then, okay, what rights do I have? And who says? You want to go down that rabbit hole? Okay. Better understand where you're going.